Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me today I have
Fin MacDonald, Program Manager for the Zero Carbon Building Program at the Canada Green Building Council.
and speaking of the council, you guys just had a big conference, so maybe you could go into some of the details on that, because you said there was a lot of prep up to this point.
Sure. So we host the Building Lasting Change conference every year, and the last 2 years have been virtual. We haven't done it in person since 2019 in Vancouver. It was absolutely great to get everybody together. We had somewhere over 400 attendees together in person, and I'll tell you, you can learn a lot at a virtual conference, but you can't beat the networking that you get when you're actually in person and able to have those sidebar conversations with people. But it was a lot of work to put that on. You know, we had 3 different streams going on, concurrent sessions during the main part of the conference, and we also did a full day summit on zero carbon buildings. So zero carbon was throughout the whole thing. We had a stream on zero carbon as well. We had a stream on materials talking about embodied carbon, and we also had a retrofit stream. So all interwoven around the subject of carbon.
Okay, what were some of the big takeaways for you? What were some of the bold initiatives to come out of it?
You know, I think that the thing that I've noticed has changed the most, even in the last 12 months, is the appetite and desire to retrofit buildings to be zero, and the understanding that this approach to incremental energy efficiency that we've been doing since energy efficiency was invented is not going to get us to zero. And we have to look at a couple big moves, and those big moves have to happen at the end of the life of your boiler, at the point of envelope failure. And I think there's a growing awareness of this and a desire to study it and be ready for those opportunities when they come. That was the biggest takeaway for me. That and the fact that embodied carbon is really picking up steam, and we're getting to the point now where it's not just enough to quantify the embodied carbon. You actually have to be reducing it.
Now, you're the manager of the Zero Carbon Building Program. Maybe you could explain what that program is and how it's going about going down to zero carbon.
Sure. So the program that we have is a larger initiative that includes a standard for certification, education, research, and government advocacy. The largest portion of this is the standard itself, though, and we launched our Zero Carbon Building Standard version 1 in 2017. We just launched version 3 last at the conference 2 weeks ago, and you know, the change in appetite for zero carbon since we launched the program, which was sort of a tepid, we'll wait and see how it goes. We're not quite ready to jump, to 2022, when just about everybody has a project they're thinking about, even behind the scenes, how they could apply zero carbon to it, with the goal of eventually scaling it up to their entire portfolio. So we have the program. We have certifications for new construction. We have certifications for existing building operations. We also do a lot of research, and in 2019, we released a financial study looking at the incremental life cycle and capital costs of new construction compared to code for zero carbon buildings. And we replicated that study last year in 2021 for existing buildings to study what is actually going to cost to retrofit those. And there's some really interesting points in there about the carbon tax and the role that will play in scheduling your retrofits over time across your portfolio.
Well, speaking of carbon taxes and governments in general, how does what you're doing tie into what federal, provincial, municipal governments are doing?
Well, it's no secret that governments are trying to remove carbon emissions from the Canadian economy. It's a big goal of the federal government. If you look at the greening government strategy the Treasury Board has, and buildings are going to play a big role of that. In fact, buildings, the operational emissions of buildings are about 17% of emissions in Canada. If you were to add in the embodied carbon of the construction and installation of those building materials, we're somewhere around 30%. That's just about a third of Canada's emissions coming from buildings. So for us to be able to bring those emissions to zero, would have a huge impact on the federal government's ability to meet its climate goals, as well as the different municipalities and provinces. And we have a goal of by 2030, we want all buildings to be operationally zero carbon, all new ones. And by 2050, we want all existing buildings to be operationally net zero carbon. And that is going to require, as I mentioned, careful attention to when those big moves happen so that you can take the right action at the end of life for the boiler plant or the building envelope. We also are going to need a 100% reduction in embodied carbon by 2050. Right. And right now, even with the best technology, we're struggling to get 40% reduction. That's about where we cap out at right now. So there's a lot of work that industry will have to do, but I think it's important for us at the Canada Green Building Council and for the building sector to be trying to minimize the embodied carbon as much as they can, make it clear to the manufacturers that this is important and we expect low carbon materials, and we're going to vote with our dollars to make sure we get them.
Okay. Next, I've got a pessimistic and an optimistic question. I recently went to a conference in Whistler where James Bourget of RDH Building Science, he talked about, and he's very much a retrofit activist, but he was saying he doesn't think the targets are going to get hit, and also that owners are going to need more incentives to get there. So on the owner side of things, how do you think, and just the I guess the commercial side of things, how do you get those people to buy in if they aren't already?
I think it's a combination of legislation and incentive. I mean, when we think about the moves that have to happen for a building to get to zero, we've got building envelopes actions that need to be taken, and we've got heating, ventilation, air conditioning improvements. The HVAC, we're going to be retrofitting the HVAC in every building between now and 2050, just because it'll be at the end of its life. So having a transition plan, so if you have a large building, study it, identify what you're going to need to do over time to bring that building to zero, and be prepared for that before that time arrives, right? If you think of your house, if your furnace goes and you call the furnace repairman, he's going to show up and sell you another furnace. If you want a heat pump, you have to study that ahead of time, find a supplier, and have a plan. So same thing on a commercial building. So if you have the heat pump option, then you're getting most of the way to zero. The problem is that last incremental peak heating load, right? And that's where the envelope comes in. And in order for us to electrify our buildings in Canada without driving up electricity demand, we have to address the envelope too. And I think that's where governments can play a role in providing incentives to help support envelope retrofits, because those aren't necessarily going to be at the end of their life between now and 2050. Some will, but there isn't a quote unquote life of a building envelope.
Right.
It's going to go till it fails, right? And the expected life gets exceeded all the time, right? So we have to take advantage of those opportunities when they come. But if they don't come, we're going to need incentives and regulations in order to make sure that we can get those envelopes retrofit.
And on the optimistic side, what in terms of new technology do you see coming down that will help reduce these? And also, COVID-19 is hardly optimistic, but it also led to a push towards better ventilation, better HVAC. Does that, in a weird way, help with reducing carbon?
I think when I think of green buildings, the good ventilation has always been part of it, and making sure that people have the fresh air to do the activity they want has to be paramount, because we can't seal up our buildings to the point where they're unhealthy and we don't want to be in them anymore. That would be counterproductive. But there are, fantastic advancements in heat pump technology, in ventilation, heat recovery, that are allowing us to provide those ventilation rates and still heat our buildings with low carbon electric heat pumps. I think on the COVID side, one of the things that I found the most inspiring was just how quickly we were able to rally together as humans and solve this problem, right? We brought a vaccine to market in a year and a half, which normally takes a decade. And that's human ingenuity. We had a monumental task and we met it. And I think we can do the same with buildings. When I think about the technology that's been coming online in the last couple of years, heat pumps for me are the thing that I think about the most. And, cold climate heat pumps we're now in the -25, -30 range, which opens up a lot more of Canada to the on the map to being accessible to air source heat pumps. And if we want to electrify our buildings and heat them as efficiently as we can, heat pump systems are the best option right now. And air source heat pumps don't require us to drill into the ground like geo-exchange systems do, so they don't have that large upfront cost. So they're a lot more accessible. On top of that, I think that the solar industry has been making great strides. We're seeing cogeneration systems that do both solar PV and hot water. In fact, our building at 100 Murray Street in Ottawa has a new system on the roof that does just that. We're also seeing building integrated photovoltaics, and this is where you replace a component of the building envelope or structure with a solar PV panel that serves both purposes. So if you think glass that generates electricity, or balcony panels, or spandrel panels for the wall that actually generate solar too, and you can put them on all facades, right? So they go on the east, south, and west, and you could even put them on the north facade for aesthetics. But that helps smooth out the solar supply curve throughout the day as well, which helps with grid integration, right? Because we don't want electricity generation ramping up and then ramping down really quickly as soon as the sun moves out of that optimal south position. So that technology is interesting too. We're starting to see it applied on buildings in Canada.
Okay, and finally, if people are interested in the Zero Carbon Building Program or the CaGBC, which I would assume they would be, where do they go, and what more information can they get?
Well, I would start with our website, cagbc.org/zerocarbon. You'll find copies of the standard. We also have resources available on our showcase page, so you can learn about zero carbon buildings that have already been built or already operating. We've got numerous examples throughout our pilot program and the early adopters of certification. On our research page, you can also find our retrofit costing study, as well as our new construction study, and a new research report we just launched last week about the green retrofit economy and what sort of jobs are going to be needed in order to ramp up zero carbon retrofits.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for joining us, Fin.
My pleasure. Thanks, Warren.